Hey folks, how you guys doing? What I figured we'd do today is to continue reviewing pivot tables. We sort of ran a number of pivot tables last week, but I'm not exactly sure how comfortable you are with them. So let's do some more of them with a different data set. And this data set is called school underscore salaries. It's an Excel file. Grab it online, throw it into a folder, make a copy of it, and open up one of those copies. Take a second to do that, and when you do, this is what it should look like. Okay, this is data that I regularly get as an observer reporter. It's data from a number of different area school districts, and it's salary data. Now I pared it down a little bit, but let's go over some of the headers. We have the school district, we have the actual school name, position of the employee, the name of the employee, status, whether he or she was full-time or part-time, and of course salary. And how many records do we have? Let's scroll down and see. So we have, give or take, 22,362 records of school employees and their salaries. And you can see on the left-hand side we have a number of different school districts. Scrolling up from Union County, a lot in Union County, and then of course we have Cabarrus started the list. And who else do we have? Just to get a quick understanding of what we're looking at. Lincoln, Kannapolis, Iredell, Statesville, Hickory, Gaston, Catawba, and Cabarrus. So a handful of counties. I typically post this data online. These guys are public employees, and it's always good to know where our tax dollars are going. But I also sometimes query the table. In this case, it'll be creating pivot tables off the data just to see if there's a story there. Now, this is going to be a little bit different from the last pivot table session in that we sort of had that pretend scenario that, hey, look, motor vehicle thefts are increasing in Charlotte. Let's look at the data to see what the data says. In this scenario, it's just, I got this data, I'm going to post it anyway. Let's run a number of different pivot tables to see if there's a story there. And you never know. There may be or there may not be. So, any questions? Write them down and let me know. But other than that, let's get started with some pivot tables. I said last class that I like to start my queries or functions or pivot tables broadly. You know, cast a wide net, I think is the way I put it. Just to get a sort of feel for my data, and then to see if there's any lane or place that I should start drilling down to for a possible story. So for this pivot table, to start widely, I don't think I'd start with, let's see how much each individual employee makes or even each individual position makes. I'm going to start as wide as I can, and that goes out to the district level. So let's create a pivot table that sees at the district level how many employees are in each district and what's their average salary. So that would be the question that I'm trying to answer. Again, I like to think of questions before I write formulas or create pivot tables. So this would be, how many employees does each district employ and what's the average salary? So if you guys are comfortable with pivot tables, try to answer that yourselves or push pause and give it a whirl. And here is how I would do that. Of course, to create a pivot table, click anywhere in your data, insert, pivot table. And just to review, this is saying this is the range of data that I'm selecting. And because I clicked in the data, it's going to copy my whole data set. So that's the range that it's selecting, which is great. And this is also great. This is saying I'm going to put your pivot table in a new worksheet. I'm not going to copy over your original data. So all we have to do is click OK. And again, let's continue the review. This is where we'll build our pivot table. And this is where the data will eventually show up and our information will be. And on the right hand side, we have the headers for our actual data. And again, you can scroll back down here to see your actual data. It's still there. And our pivot table is now called Sheet 1. So here are our actual headers. And to start creating your pivot table, you take whatever header you want and you drag it into one of these 4 boxes. Rows is usually the most popular box because this is going to build your data in your pivot table. Then we have values. Values is usually used for numbers. So if you want to sum something, count something, average something, that's where values would go. Columns, if you want to create another column of your data, you drop your header in there. And filter, just like the filter on a worksheet, this allows you to select certain characteristics of your data and view only them. So if our question was, how many employees does each district have and what's their average salary, I would start with dragging district into rows. And the great thing about pivot tables is you can drag and drop them and sort of play around with them until you get the answer that looks right and that you can fact check yourself later. So, and to remove data from a certain box, you just click on it, remove field. To get it down there, I just drag it down there. Okay, so there are our districts. And we sort of eyeballed the data a little bit, but that makes sense because I remember Union was all the way down the bottom and we had Catawba and Cabarrus up top, and I remember seeing Gaston, I should say, Hickory, and Iredell, Statesville. So they are our districts in the data. Now, if we want to count the number of employees, what will we do? Well, it makes sense to drag employees somewhere, and because we're treating it sort of as a number, we want to count them, drag it to values. Okay. So there we have that. Now I'm going to take a second to pause and I just want to fact check myself because I'm still getting my feet sort of underneath me when it comes to pivot tables. So a decent way to fact check yourselves, and I would recommend that you all do this, is to just eyeball it. Okay, so Cabarrus County right here says, my pivot table says it has 3,170 employees. Now let's fact check ourselves. Go back to your main data sheet called school_salaries. Sort the data, if it isn't already, by Cabarrus. So select all, custom sort, and district A to Z. Okay. So now we have all Cabarrus County employees lined up at the beginning. Let's go and sort of get an eyeball of where the last Cabarrus County employee is, and if the pivot table is correct, it should be at row 3,169 because we're subtracting 1 for the header. So 3,169. Okay, so I'm just scrolling down, just trying to fact check for myself a little bit. 3,170. Actually, I apologize. 3,171 is what it should be because I'm subtracting 1 for the header. So this is great. So my pivot table, when I counted the employees, is correct. Makes sense? 3,171 here. I subtract 1 for the header, which gives me 3,170. And that's exactly what I have here, 3,170. Okay. So I fact checked myself. I feel good about this particular pivot table so far anyway. So I have how much each county has as of the number of employees. Now I want to find out their average salary. So again, I'm thinking about the average header, and because I want to do some sort of math to it, in this case I don't want to count it, I don't want to sum it, but I want to average it. So I'm going to drag that down to values as well. There we go. Now this needs a little bit of work. Now why does it need a little bit of work? Because of that header. This says it's summing the salaries. So it's taken everyone, all those 3,170 employees in Cabarrus County, and it's adding their salaries up right here. I don't want to do that. That doesn't really make much sense as far as finding out information for a story. So I'm going to click on the drop down box. I'm going to click on value field settings, and I want to get away from sum, but I want to average them. Click OK. There we go. So we just created a pivot table. Now we can sort of modify this. It looks great, but let's change the C column, the average salary column, into a currency, just to make it look readable. And let's also sort it. And remember from last session that to sort, you don't have to select all. If you're in a big worksheet, like our school salary worksheet here, you'd have to select all to sort. Pivot tables, you do not. Just put your cursor in any of the in the column that you want to sort it by, and then you go sort, custom sort, largest to smallest. Okay. So, as I said before, I always like to sort of put my queries in the notes. And in this case, because I don't really know what story I'm looking at, I'm just sort of fishing around, I'm going to write two different sentences. I'm going to say the average salary for the school districts surrounding Mecklenburg County, which these are, is $31,500. But I'm also going to say that the Newton Conover School District, which employs around 260 employees, provides an average salary of about $42,600. So I'm going to write that down, store it away, just in case I want to come back to that information later. There you go. So I'm going to save this sheet as employee count PT. So EMPLOYEE count PT, because this is counting my employees right here, and it's a pivot table. So I like to name my sheets or my data sets as plainly as possible, because if I run 24 pivot tables, I know how to find them really easily. So that was a good sort of wide view of what we were looking at as far as our data. Let's click back on our data and notice it hasn't changed, which is great. And since when you hear about or when you read about school salaries, 9 times out of 10 they're not talking about directors or custodians or anyone else in our data, drivers like school bus drivers. 9 times out of 10 they're talking about teachers, right? So let's run the same pivot table in a new pivot table that filters out just teachers. So we want to grab the school district, we want to count how many teachers there are, and we want to find an average salary for teachers. Can you guys do that? And I'll give you a quick hint. You can either filter out table or your teachers in this worksheet and save it as like school salaries teacher in another worksheet, copy and paste it like we always done for filters, or you can filter the teachers out in your pivot table. Either one's fine. I'm going to do it as a pivot table. So give it a whirl and see if we come up with the same information. Insert pivot table. That's perfect. Click OK. Again, it's going to be almost the same thing as our previous one. So my previous one, I had district in rows. I had employee in values. Again, I'm getting that 3,170, which is great. I am going to average my values. So I'm going from sum to average right now. I should have the same information that I had before. And I'm actually, while I'm at it, I'm going to turn this into a concurrency. So I'm right back where we were before. Now I'm going to do one more thing, and I'm going to filter for just teachers. So I'm going to take position, drag it to filter. Again, that's position into the filter box. And this gives me this drop down box if you need a little reminder. And I'm allowed to select as many as I want by clicking that box, but I just want teachers. So I'm going to scroll down, click teacher, click OK. So my numbers changed. Remember, Newton Conover was what, 42,000 I believe. Now it's 40,000. The average was 31,000. Now it's 32,000. So this is a count by district of the number of teachers each district employs. Here's my count. And it's also an average salary for teachers for each district. So I'm going to do it like we did before, and I'm going to sort it from highest to lowest. Click OK. Okay, well, Newton Conover is no longer at top. It looks like Lincoln County District pays teachers the best on average at $43,000. So there's two more sentences that I'd write. Go to something simple like this. The average teacher pay for the district surrounding Mecklenburg is $32,600 right here. And the Lincoln County School District, with around 1,300 employees, pays an average of $43,400, which is the most in the area. Something simple like that. And while I'm at it, I'm going to save this as teacher count PT for pivot table. Great. One more thing, to fact check myself, I could do the same thing that we did for Cabarrus earlier. I could sort my main data sheet by school district and then filter out just teachers and count to see how much were in each county. And that would be a good fact check. I'm confident with the data that I have, so I'm confident that if I were to filter and sort just teachers, I'd get 2372. But I would recommend that you all do that every once in a while, especially on the tests, just to make sure that you didn't have any sort of slip-ups. Now let's do another one, and you could actually add this one to the same pivot table that we're on now. But because this is practice and because we're trying to get used to pivot tables, let's start a new one. Okay, so go back to your school salaries. And you notice one thing that we could have filtered out when we did how much teachers earn. We could have also filtered out part-time teachers. There's probably not too many of them, but here's one right down here actually. Cabarrus County, Cox Mill Elementary, Tanya Crowell. She's part-time and she makes $11,160. So that's probably not fair to add part-time teachers into our pivot table because that would bring down the average salary quite a bit. So let's create a new pivot table. Let's count the number of teachers for each school district. Let's find their average salary. Remember to filter out just teachers, but also filter out so we only have full-time teachers. Can y'all do that? Well, I'm going to do it, and you can push pause on the video and run it yourself and see if you got it right. Otherwise, follow along. Insert pivot table. Okay. So once again, district into rows, employee into values, salary into values. I don't want to sum salary. I want to average it. I want to filter for just teachers, so position into filters. Scroll down. Okay. Turn that while I'm at it into a currency. Okay. Click back to my data, and I just want full-time, so I'm going to drag status into filters, and another filter pops up, and I just want full-time. There we go. And you can see our grand total changed from 32,000 to an average of 33.5, and Lincoln actually went up a little bit. Lincoln is now at 45.6. Let's sort the data and see if Lincoln is still up top. Yes, it is. So maybe I'd keep that last sentence or two that I wrote, but I probably wouldn't. I'd probably amend it to say full-time teachers earn an average of 33.5, and Lincoln's full-time teachers make the most at $45,600 on average. But you see how we're asking the data questions, and with each response, we have to put our critical thinking caps on to think, okay, is this right? Is there something else that I can take into consideration? Because you don't want to run incorrect numbers and then have the school districts come back to you later on and say, hey, wait, half of our employees are part-time, and that drags down the average. Make sense? Let's save this one as teacher underscore FT for full-time count PT. Teach full-time. So we looked at how much teachers make on average. Let's find out how much principals at the surrounding school districts make. And let's, in this case, also include the employee name. Because we should have far fewer principals than teachers, so I think it won't overwhelm us to actually look at the employee name as well. So create a pivot table that grabs employee name and the district that they're in, that also averages that person's salary, and make sure you filter on principals and also on full-time, just in case there's some part-time principals there, which I doubt it, but you never know. So feel free to push pause and do that, or follow along. Insert pivot table. Okay, just like always. Again, we have our blank pivot table here that we're going to build on. And I want to this time view the employee's name, so that's going to go into rows. And I also want the individual school, not necessarily the district, but the school. You see how they sort of build on top of each other? This is one thing I don't necessarily like in pivot tables. That's why I use SQL. It's a lot more pleasant looking, but for now this will do. And remember, I want to filter on salary. I filter on status and position. So let's filter for position and just grab principals. Okay, and just in case there are some part-time principals, I'm just going to grab full-time ones. Okay, now you see how I'm doing this a little bit out of order. I went from rows to filters. I have been going from rows to values, but it doesn't matter. As long as you get all your data in there, it'll all turn out the same. And this I want to finish up by averaging salaries. So I'm going to take the salary, drag it into values because we're doing math on it, and I don't want to sum. Although the sum and the average should be the same, think about it, because if you have one person's total is going to be just like you if you average it by one person. But I'm going to average it just in case, and I'll show you why in a second. Okay, and I'm also going to put one more into value, and I'm going to count the number of employees just to make sure that Lincolnton High doesn't have 2 principals, or Sherwood Elementary doesn't have 2. So I'm going to take employees, I'm going to drag it into values. And you see how these ones pop up? If one of these is Riverbend was 2, then I'd have 2 names, and that might be a little red flag, and that's the reason I averaged it. But it looks like they're all 1s, and to find out, just to make sure that they're all 1s, I'm going to sort it by count of employees, and this will bring the highest number up top, obviously, just in case 1 or 2 schools have multiple principals, which I doubt. Great, they do not. So I know each school has 1 principal, and I have the principal's name followed by the school name, principal's name followed by school name, school name, etc. And just in case you're curious, if I wanted to minimize one of these, I can click that button and get rid of Teresa's school, or I can get rid of that button and get rid of Mary's school. But I'm always curious on whom earns the most, so I'm going to sort it now by average salary. Custom sort, largest to smallest. That did not work out. There we go. That works out better. And it looks like Larry Rogers at Katz School. I'm not exactly sure what district that's in, but Larry makes $125,000, followed by Jimmy Watson at Iron Station makes $110,000. That's pretty good money, isn't it? Now if we scroll down, let's just see who the lowest paid teacher is, or principal. And that's a big difference. You're talking $125,000 all the way down to now $15,300. That may be some problems with the data. So I'd call up Concord Middle School just to verify that. And the same thing with Wolf Meadow Elementary. Now all these in the 30s and 40s, these are likely right. Maybe they're really young principals. Or maybe they have assistant principals who have take on half the work. I don't know. But this is where the data is just the start of your reporting. And you'd have to find out why there's such a difference. But you can clearly tell that there's a big difference from all these 30s and 40s. Right here. A lot more 40s. All the way up to 125,000. So that could be interesting. The disparity in teacher pay for the school districts surrounding Mecklenburg County. 125,000 all the way down to likely in the 30s. I'm going to save this worksheet as principal underscore FT for full-time count pivot table. There we go. And as I should have been doing all along, I'm going to save my data as well. I like to save as much as I can. But there you go. Now I had to write a sentence saying that pay for principals in the area varies greatly, from roughly $33,000 a year to $125,000 a year. Something of that sort. Make sense? Great. We just saw that principal pay varies greatly from school to school, right? Well, how much does teacher pay vary within a school? In other words, is there one teacher in a school making $100,000 and another teacher in the same school making $20,000? That could be interesting. So here's the question. How much is the highest paid and the lowest paid teacher earning for each school? Could you figure that out using a pivot table? Let's try. You might want to follow along with this one because these will be a little bit new. So insert pivot table, just like always. And we're not interested necessarily in employee name, but we are interested in school to find the highest and the lowest in each school. So drag school to rows, position to filter because we're just interested in teachers again. And you can see all the different positions that we actually have. And we're also interested, just to be fair, in status being full-time. So filter out just full-time. There we go. So now we have a list of all of our schools in our data set. That's about all we have, but we're ready when we drag and drop something else into the boxes. We're ready just to concentrate on teachers and just status equals full-time. So I'm interested in how much the best paid teacher makes and how much the worst paid teacher makes for each school right here. So they both deal with salary, right? So take salary, and because it's a number, because we're going to do some sort of calculation to it, drag it to values. There we go. And like always, it starts with sum of salary. We don't want sum, and in this case we don't even want average. We want to find the best paid teacher. So click on value field settings, and we don't want to count it, we don't want to average it, but max. So we want to find the highest number for teacher salary at each school. Click OK. The max. Okay, so what this says is that A.T. Allen Elementary School, the highest paid teacher is paid $57,900. At A.L. Brown School, the highest paid teacher is paid $31,158. Okay, so we're halfway there. Let's finish it off by finding the lowest salary listed. So again, we take salary and we drag it back into values. So we have salary twice in values. 1, 2, and you can probably guess at what we want because we don't want sum, we don't want average, we already have max. We're going to select minimum. So the minimum amount of salary. Click OK. Now there you have it. Pretty powerful, huh? This says that at Battleground School, the highest paid teacher makes $76,000. The lowest paid full-time teacher makes $22,900. That's a pretty big difference. Now what you could do, you could actually do a percent change formula to find the difference between the highest and the lowest paid teacher in each school. Let's do that. First, I'm going to name this pivot table Teacher Max Min PT. Teacher Max Min pivot table. Then I'm going to take the data. Oops, I just clicked on the filter, so I don't want to do that. I'm going to delete this sheet. Delete it. So I'm going to take the data and I'm going to select all, just like that, and I'm going to copy and paste it into a new worksheet. Control V. Copy, paste. There we go. So here's our pivot table, but it's in a new worksheet. And a lot of times when you run calculations on pivot tables that are already running calculations, like a max and a min, you sort of have to take the data and paste it into a new sheet to run any calculations. Because I'm interested in finding the difference for each school between the highest and the lowest paid teacher. So, to find the difference, it's sort of a percent change, right? How much is the highest paid one different from the lowest paid? Sort of like how many homicides happened in 2017 compared to 1990. What's the change? What's the difference between those two? You all remember the percent change formula? Click in, I'm going to label this percent difference. Then in D2 equals shift 9, your newest value minus your old divided by your old. So newest would be the maximum minus your minimum, close it, divided by your min. So B2 minus C2 divided by C2. Enter. And then copy down if it doesn't already for you. And you should have everything filled out. And just to make it sort of readable, I'm going to turn it into a percent. So what this is saying is that at A.T. Allen Elementary School, the highest paid teacher is paid $57,900, the lowest paid $28,700, which is a 101% difference. You can see you get up to a lot of them. Some of this data, because it's raw data, it's always dirty, so I'd question something like that, where the lowest paid full-time teacher is only making $1,480, or it looks like you have a couple of them, so there's probably something wonky about that, but this gives you at least a halfway decent idea of the range of salaries, and also gives you questions to ask each school district as you start your reporting. And I'm going to sort it just for the heck of it. I'm going to sort it by percent difference. There we go. You can see a lot of these. It's raw data, so it means it's dirty data. But you get into some of them that sort of begin to look legit. Like I bet Iron Station and Battleground, I bet you new teachers probably do make $22,900. So there you go. That's a max and a min statement as a pivot table. Before I close out of this, I'm going to save this sheet as teacher max min sheet, because it's not a pivot table. Teacher max min sheet. There we go. And I'm back at my main data. And let's run one more, and let's find out of all the positions that we have, and we probably have, I don't know, 24 maybe. Let's start by just looking at what position makes the most on average. I'm curious about that. It's probably principals, but heck, you never really know. So what position makes the most on average? And let's look at just full-time as well. So insert pivot table, all good. Position into rows this time. Salary as usual into values. And I'm going to add an average rather than a sum. I'm going to turn it into a currency. And right now it's sorted by the row label, but I'm going to sort it by salary top to bottom. Just like that. So that sort of makes sense. Principals on average make the most. And they're heads of the school, so I understand that. Followed by directors, nurses, therapists, and teachers are all the way down at, I don't know, maybe row 14 or so at $32,000. So let's drag status into filter to see if it changes at all. And it may change just a little bit because I'm selecting only full-time. Click OK. Principals are still the most, and teachers are still down here. So that's another pivot table that we could have, that teachers on average are paid even less than electricians and mechanics at schools, and even tutors. Let's save this pivot table as position underscore pay in case we need to come back to it. And now for some homework. Answer these 3 questions. What school district pays drivers the most on average, and how much do drivers there earn? That's pretty simple. We went over that before. What district employs the most teachers who are paid more than $50,000? And the final one, how many full-time directors are there at each school who make more than $50,000? Now there's a hint. For the final 2 questions, it's best to start with an if formula in your main spreadsheet. Does that make sense? Let me know if you have any questions, and I will see you next time, and we're going to go over our a review for the Excel test, and holler if you have any thoughts. Thanks, guys.